Probably I should say something over that. Oh, we'll just let it run through again. Not to worry. All right. So, how do I get it into a big screen? Here we go. Okay, let's just pretend again that we're just here by ourselves. How's it going, boys? Good to see you.
Going pretty good. I'm kind of adjusting still just adjusting to Portuguese time, and then adjusting to the change in hours recently.
Yeah.
The other night. Yeah, catching up on sleep as well, but otherwise good.
How long are you in Portugal for, Phil?
Till March the 13th. So I have exactly a month here before I go to UK, see my brothers, my mum, and then return to Canada. Yeah.
Good deal.
Did you say March?
No, sorry, till November 13th. Sorry, I meant. Okay. But I return to Canada in March. Yeah, that's right.
Okay. I just had the thought maybe you're getting away for the winter. I'd love to do that.
It wasn't intentional to get away for the whole winter. I actually like the winters. I like cold winters. But I don't know. I just 5 months away. I just I hadn't seen my family in 5 years. And I just thought they'd be in England. So yeah, ends up being the whole winter away.
Okay. It's been about 2, I think, for me, or when 2020, I think we came back after COVID. So what is that? What are we in now? 2024. So 4 years.
Yeah. Soon to be 2025.
Since you've been to Australia.
Yeah. We're right on the
Yep.
Right, my wife was working out yesterday. We're less than 2 months away from Christmas.
Yeah, we're almost there, eh? And then we got the you got the friggin' election in a couple of days too, isn't it?
I think it's next Monday. Yeah, I think the 4th, November 4th, next Monday.
Yeah.
Be glad when all that's over. We can get rid of all the ads on the TV and internet and all that stuff. I'm sure there'll be some continuation of some stuff, but the ads should go away.
Yeah. So that brings up something for me, which is this aspect of time. And I don't know if it's worth kind of going into an inquiry about this, but it was just something that's been a contemplation for me recently. And I kept hearing different things about it. One of them was that time isn't, what would be the word? So they sent a clock up into orbit and they synchronized it with a clock down on Earth. And when it came back, the two clocks were different. They were running it, even though they were running at supposedly at the same pace, like they ended up in having different times. And then I heard recently this guy who sort of said scientists know now that all of the different organs in our body, they experience he used the word temporality in different ways, which I found really interesting. And then recently as well, I've just been, I think we know, like, as we get older, time just seems to speed up and fly by much faster than when we were kids, which, as far as I know, is more to do with our presence, like in the present moment. As we get older, we tend to move out of the present moment a lot more. But then there's also something about the way time has been moving in these last couple of years. It's like these odd kind of waves or shifts in the speed of time, and I don't have any wording for it. I don't really have any language for it, but I've been finding time kind of moving in strange ways. And maybe that's just my perception with everything that's sort of going on in the world at the moment. And then one last thing to add was yesterday I was listening to this this woman talking about, I think it was from an article in the Emergence magazine, and she was talking about a discovery of ripples in time created by the movement of massive bodies in the galaxy, like large black holes or things like that, which I also found interesting. There's something about kind of this aspect of time that I just has caught my attention recently, and yeah, might be a bit too big to kind of look into, use as a self-inquiry, but
I love it myself. We do like a time inquiry in the workshops from time to time. But quite often it goes over people's head, just depending on what sort of state of inquiry they've like looked at. If there's been no like question of who I am, what this is, and what time is, then it just goes over the head, because it's a direct looking for time. It's like, okay, it's a direct looking for time. But hey, before we go there, how about you, Rob? How's it going?
It's going good. I was. It's interesting that you brought that up, Phil, because I've been hearing different people. Maybe it's been going on for a while, but I'm more in tune to it now, talking about the lack of understanding that we have about time. And so we know pretty much that the calendars and clocks and all that are based on what they know, but what's beyond that, what is it that we don't know? And so that's the exploration that that they're kind of venturing into now, which of course is always what I'm interested in, is to going into the unknown and learning more and being open-minded in those areas, as far as how it relates to us and what it is that we don't understand about it. If I was to look at how I experience time today, it does seem like it goes a lot quicker. January through December seems to go faster. And I would say that it definitely relates to the fact that I'm older, also retired, so I don't have as much emphasis on being up at a certain time, although I get up super early. So it seems, if I don't work, if I go on vacation for a couple of weeks, we leave and go down to the beach, I can lose a sense of time, like what day is it? And then remember what day, just because I have a more just in experiencing and living and not identified with time as much. Whereas when I was growing up, it was like I wanted to be a teenager. 13, I wanted to get my driver's license. 16, I wanted to be able to drink a beer. 18, 21, you're considered like a young man. So there's all of these benchmarks that we kind of shoot for. But I don't know how we would translate that into an inquiry, at least my understanding of inquiry, which is to look at those aspects of experience that seem to tweak us in a way that we're identified with them, and to be able to inquire in that could break the identification and therefore allow that tweak to relax, and experience becomes much more open, I'll say.
So previously selected device. Has my video gone off for you guys?
It has.
How do I restart that?
Luke, can we get your take? I mean, you're the only one that really hadn't spoke on time yet. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, yes. It's interesting. I've looked at this a few times just as a direct inquiry. So I hear what you're saying about like the elements of time being interwoven in the suffering, like the idea of us projecting into the future and the fear of that and the worry that might come. And from what I heard you say was that you can, like, seeing an element of that in that suffering is enough to break the suffering or take the edge off it anyway. Like the logicalness of, of like tomorrow not being here, or the past being gone,
Or what could happen tomorrow,
Yeah.
or identification with something that had happened in the past that
Yeah.
may still have a hold on us.
Yeah, and it's a really good, for me, it's one of those good avenues into inquiry, because it's present in all suffering. Whether it's the resistance of I want whatever it is in this moment to be away, or the other way, I don't want to get to that. Do you know what I mean? Like there's that forward and backwards, or then from the present moment, the forward and backwards kind of thing. I wish this was past already, or I wish this wasn't here, in the future or whatever. But I've done a few inquiries of just directly what is time, what is the experience of time, and they've been born out of like exactly what you're talking about. They've been born out of what you're both saying, in terms of there's an experience of time being relative, almost not constant. That it speeds up and slows down at different moments, and I think maybe that's where the inquiry came from, was like, because there's an element of suffering in those two things. It's like we're discerning what it is about the time in those moments that's connected to the suffering. So the day's gone quickly, and I haven't wanted it to go quickly. I ended up, and it's frigging the end of the evening, and I've got to go to bed, or I've got to do something else. Or what comes up for me is about my wife. She's like, it's almost Friday, and all of a sudden we're here and it's Thursday, and we go through the same days, but all of a sudden we're here, it's Thursday. And I don't know if that's necessarily suffering, but it's an interesting sort of phenomenon. And I would actually say it's the opposite, that it's like in the present moment, there isn't time. And really that's where we come to with the inquiry. What's the experience of time in this moment? And if you close your eyes and you don't look at a clock, right? And you don't look at, you take the obvious things out, like the level of the sun, or, what's supposed to be happening in this moment, and just come directly into this moment without the noises of the clock ticking or anything that you can easily say that that's time. And then say, what's the experience of time in this moment? And because I've done it before, so I don't have an experience of time in this moment. And I'm not saying that generally, I'm just saying in that moment. And then what happens is something gets tied to the sound of my voice, and it becomes a form of time. And then it becomes the suffering as well, like, oh, it's gone on too long, or, I don't know. I have to sit with it a little bit more. So time arises just then, and it arises as an impatience, actually, and it arises as a sensation in the belly, and it comes up into the mind as a thought, and with it comes the sense of time, like, oh, I'm impatient, and that contains time, and that's where time seems to be. And then then I just do a direct inquiry. So I go to the sensation, I go, where is maybe not necessarily the suffering, but where is the time in this? And what happens is I'm drawn into the image of myself being impatient, and it seems like the time is on my face, and it's the same of like, like a like an inquiry about fear, or an inquiry about suffering, or a direct looking for the thing by itself without anything around it. And it's this type of inquiry is always the same. It's either in the thought, or it's in the sensation. And
let me just make sure I understand what you're saying. Are you actually saying that you can actually find time in
no,
the sensation, or in the thought? So the image, or
no,
word.
but I have the experience of it though, right? I had the experience of impatience, which
Right.
was
which is a feeling, right? So
it's an idea, but it's also an idea of time, and it's also what we actually take time to be. But if we look directly for it, like if I go through that and
so impatience would be like wanting to get somewhere, right? It's like wanting something to happen. There's an anticipation, or something that's not happening fast enough, which is an indication of time. Is that
seems to be? It seems to be.
Right, absolutely, yeah.
So then I went through that. So now the question is to you: what's your experience of time in this moment?
I'm gonna let Rob answer that, and I'm just gonna try to leave and then come back to see if my video will come back on. But you guys carry on. I don't want to interrupt.
Okay, mate.
So very similar to what you were speaking of, without thought and feeling, which we know from inquiry. So when I say that, I don't want to pass over just the experiencing of those things, but we've done a lot of inquiry together over the years. And so the like the feeling or sensation is going to be a place in the body, right? And a thought's going to either be an image that's arising, or words that I see or hear.
Yeah.
So, and those are the way that we experience. So without those things, can we, like, if taste doesn't seem to have any sound, any time,
yeah.
or hearing doesn't seem to have any time, although hearing you could try to identify with distance, like it's a ways away or it's closer.
Yeah.
Smell, none of those seem to have any type of time, but a thought or feeling, like anxiety about the future, right? A future that hadn't happened, something that hadn't come along yet. But in that anxiety, if we go in there, there's like this.
So sorry, are you doing it in this moment? Are you like doing an inquiry in this moment?
No, I'm not. I'm actually describing how that would actually unfold. I'm being more analytical about the unfolding of it, and it's the reason is because if I go into this moment, which you don't really go into, but just recognize what's here, there's never time.
Yeah,
I never experienced time.
Yeah,
it's like if you sit in meditation, all of a sudden you open your eyes and an hour's passed. It's like there wasn't really any time, wasn't really, but you may set an alarm clock so that you could come out of it in an hour.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
So there is the way of still the way the world operates. Catching a plane, catching a train, being at somebody's house at a certain time, got to be at the job, that type of time. But in the present moment, everything just seems to move through, come and go.
Yeah.
And if there's something that's identified with thought, feeling, then that's where the inquiry, for me, that's where it all starts.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. What about you, Phil? What's your experience of time in this moment?
I can resonate with both of what you were both saying. So in those places of meditation, I have to actually be, what is it? Like deepen the meditation itself, because I can find that sometimes when I've meditated, depends on the day, essentially, but some days I can go through a whole hour and not really think about much at all, and get to the end of the session just like you mentioned, Rob, and realize like, oh, and a whole hour has passed. Could have been 10 minutes, could have been 5 minutes, could have been half an hour. And then other sessions, my mind pulls me out of that my mind pulls me out of that present moment, and it will shove me into time. And often it's that anticipation you were talking about. Like I'm expecting something, I'm waiting for something, I'm impatient for the end of the session. I'm getting bored, or my mind is saying I'm bored, and it's looking for something different to what is happening now. And then as I look at it right now, if I'm looking for an experience of time, it comes with movement. So I'm kind of looking for some sensation that arises, or some thought, and the thoughts are kind of moving in my perception. They're moving through space in a way, and then the same with the sensation. Like if it's dead still, it tends to help me. Maybe I'm not sure, but maybe it tends to help me kind of be at peace with what is right here. Whereas when something is moving, it's like when sensation is moving, it's like I've got to follow it, and it's moving through the space of my body, and there's some sort of correlation between, I guess, between speed and time, or space and time. Like how fast is this moving, and can I track it? Can I follow it? And if I can follow it, then there's some sense in the background of time passing as it moves.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then it brings up thoughts of I don't know, scientists like Einstein or whatever, and they're talking about this relationship between space and time. And then I start coming to thoughts of, or images of, the orbits of planetary bodies around the sun, and the farther the orbit, the greater their year is. Like the further away they are from the sun, and I guess it relates to the speed that they're moving around the sun as well. But their year is, that planet's year is going to be far greater than the Earth, for example, which is much closer to the sun than Pluto or Jupiter or whatever.
Yeah.
And so that kind of connects me to this sense of time's relationship with our seasons, for example. Like before any of that clock stuff, so when you were mentioning what's the experience of time now without looking at any kind of timepiece, before we had any timepiece, there was just this sense of seasons passing. It wasn't about seconds or hours or days or whatever. Before any calendar, for example, like it was just this noticing of what changed with regard to each different season, how things heated up, how things cooled down, and then the movement of stars in the night sky. And the last thing that brings me to, before I pass over, is this. I did this 4-day wilderness vigil. Rob, you helped me along with that, and it was like going out into the Portuguese mountains for 4 days, not eating anything, and staying awake at night, holding vigil at night. And it was such an interesting experience, because I was quite far away from any local village or any sign of civilization. And I just always remember this, like lying down on the ground at night, and I would always get to this place where I'd be scanning the sky, and I'd be watching the Big Dipper, which I think is Ursa Major, the Great Bear, moving across the sky. And at some point in the early hours, the the second star on the sort of the panhandle, the handle of that dipper, would reach a branch that I was lying directly underneath, and a branch of a tree, and then I'd hear this chime of the church bells, like that would echo through this valley. So it was this weird sort of relationship between a really old way of perceiving time and navigation, I guess, the way people used to navigate by the stars, and then this new way, this modern way, like these church bells would chime every half hour, and I would know that when that second star on the panhandle kind of got to the end of this tree branch above me, it was 3 o'clock in the morning, and it would chime 3 o'clock in the morning. And there was something about that relationship, or like I was sort of far from civilization, and yet the bell was tolling, like to sort of mark these hours going by. And sometimes it would frustrate the hell out of me that I could hear this bell, because I just wanted to be away from all of that and away from that influence. And other times it wouldn't really bother me. It was just a gentle
reminder. At the
reminder.
end, it would have excited you too, I imagine.
Say that again.
At the end, like as it was coming to an end, it would have excited you.
Yeah, I guess so.
I don't know.
Yeah, it would be nice when it would end. Yes, when the bell tolling would end, because then it would kind of bring me back to this sense of peace and this sense of real presence. In touch with the present moment, which meant kind of, so because I wasn't eating, for example, we break up our day into these sections around meals. In a way, we have meals generally at the same sorts of times. So there are all these little hourly chimes of the bell, I guess, like throughout our day, like that are related to our routines, are related to our rituals. We shower at this sort of time, we eat at this sort of time.
Yeah.
But when we're away from all of that, and when I wasn't eating for those 4 days, I was just really much more aware of my body, and much more aware of, like, when my body was tired in the day because I'd been up all night, I would take a nap, and it felt much more natural. Whereas when time is there, when that experience of time or those time pieces are around us, it's very easy to get kind of locked into it and start to become automatic, like a factory, like starts up at 9 o'clock, goes up until break time at 11, and so on and so forth. Like, yeah. I'll stop there.
What was interesting, I think, for me was that you related time to the speed of the movement, because that's a part of it that I'd never really thought about before. I've related time to being like movement itself, distance. The distance between here and here could be seen of as time. But that another and then also the attention part of it, the attention that was being drawn along, and how that was, that could change, I guess. It was the same as what you're saying at the end, that like the relativeness of it, at least this is what I'm hearing, the relativeness of it, and how it can seem like a longer period of time depending on what it means, as opposed to being like a quick amount of time depending on what it means. And then there's the stepping out of time altogether, where there's no sense of time. And another inquiry I'd like to do, or I like to do, that's not really connected with suffering, is of space. So I like to do in terms of space and the body and sensation, and because I noticed in my mind that, okay, if I think about my foot, we might have gone through this before, but I love it. That if I think about my foot, or in order to feel my foot, I need to think about my foot. And an image comes up into my mind. And that image, what it does is it gives form to the sensation, as well as it gives distance to the sensation. So when I think about my foot, also what comes into my mind, as well as the image of my foot, is the image of where I am in relation to it. Right? So up behind the eyes, or up in this sort of upward area, that all of this upward area-ness is also just a thought in my mind. Because if my eyes are closed, then I don't see my head or my face, and I might be able to feel a little bit the sense of movement, but again, I don't know if it's just me or not, but what happens for me when I move my head, and I know I'm moving my head, I see the image in my mind of my head. So that movement, or that sensation of movement, and I wouldn't differentiate between the two, a sensation of, say, fear, and then the sensation of movement. But it's defined by the thought that's in my mind. And then, say, if I come back to the feeling of the foot, right? And I feel that, and I let the image of my foot slip away out of my mind. And it takes a little while sometimes, like I'm doing that now, and I've got the image of the top part of my foot in my mind. And I've got the sense of the distance again. Actually, it was interesting too, because initially I didn't have a sense of distance. It was only when the top part of my body came in that it gave that sense of distance. But when those things fade away and the sensations felt just as a sensation, without the images, then there's no distance between me and the sensation, and there's no shape or form to the sensation. And it made me curious what you're saying about this, because attention as well, like, it's interesting. I think with suffering, what happens as well is there's this movement with suffering of attention, because we're stuck in trying to get away from the sensation. We're stuck in trying to get up into the mind, to get away, or to think about something to get away from the feeling. Well, then we get stuck in the other way, and we're trying to get out of our mind by, addictive kind of things to do with the body. And then there's this, like, that movement of attention is also a thought that happens in the mind, which I don't think we think about. We don't generally have a good understanding of. And I love that like, when I open my eyes, I love that seeing doesn't require anything, but then looking in the seeing requires like an act of, again, something happening in my mind that it's hard to explain, but there's some action that happens in my mind as thought that allows me to see, or to look in the seeing. And the seeing itself is without effort, which is interesting. Like, there's no effort at all in seeing or hearing. It's just happening. But then there seems to be this, and then the whole point of this, right, is that at the center of all of these experiences is this sense of I, right? All of this stuff revolves around the sense of I, even if it's not obvious in the mind. Like, if I, again, go back to my foot, it contains a sense of I. Because the moment I break something off, meaning like I've got the foot, right? And the foot's not me as well. The distance comes in with the sense of me and the breaking. It's the same with the seeing. But all of that stuff revolves around the sense of I, which is also a thought in the mind that is there. That if you can see it, and you can, like, let that fade away, then it's the same as that sense of time, I would say, and distance. That then there's the experience of no I, of no Luke, or it goes like this for me. It goes that the sense of Luke falls away, and then there's this I am I am something, but I don't have a name or flavor, and then from time to time that will fall away, and then there's no then there's just the seeing again. But in the looking, it's Luke. I can see that Luke is here looking, and then behind that, I can see that the seeing is happening without the Luke that's looking. Which is interesting. It's interesting to me to use inquiry in this way, because it's a joyful thing. Whereas the suffering, sometimes it's just like, I don't know, it's intrinsic in the suffering to want to get rid of it. Whereas if you can, if there's some curiosity, like with time or space or sense of Luke, it's got a different quality in the looking. Sorry to take over a bit there.
Yeah, one of the reasons I really like the format that we're using is because different things will pop up for each of us.
Yeah.
And so when I was listening to Phil and he was talking about time, he was talking about the Big Dipper getting to the branch, and then he knew it was 3 o'clock, and then the bells would chime and irritation would come up. I'm trying to get away from all of that, is what he said. So there's the words that come up, and then he said in other times it didn't bother him. But there wasn't any sense of creating any of that, right? It was a spontaneous unfolding to that situation that would just arise when the bell would chime. You would sit there and then something would come up, and maybe the next thought would be like, I got to move another mile or two away. I'm too close or whatever, and so the mind becomes the director of the suffering to try to alleviate it or figure out how, when we know from our practice with inquiry that it's being aware, going in and holding those experiences and seeing, we talk about this a lot, like what I have to get away from that, or there was irritation. So the feeling usually will happen before the thought, right? And the feeling will trigger the spontaneous part of suffering. And the more I identify with that and hold that, then the greater my suffering becomes.
Yeah.
And that's the way I seem to experience it. So I really picked up rather quickly. I think the more that we've done inquiry, the more we'll hear that in conversations. And what I notice is sometimes I just forget, or I'm not present with it. And so it comes up, I'll identify with the story that's going on for me or something that's happening. And then I'll get on a call with one of you guys or something, and almost immediately y'all will point it out. So what's going on? And then there's like a recognition of identification with that particular thought. The quicker version for me, when I'm a little bit more in the inquiry presence, is to try to find that sense of I that's suffering. It's like there was a guy asking me this weekend, we were on a golf trip, and he was smoking weed, and he goes, "You've studied some of this." So he wanted me to start talking about some of the experiences of meditation and stuff like that. So I rambled on for a good 10 or 12 minutes. And at the end of it, I just kind of smiled to myself and said, the I that was telling that story doesn't even exist. like the me that's had all this,
Did his head explode, Rob?
It's just, no, I didn't say that to him, but I look for that, and it's amusing that I can, actually be talking about it in a sense. Experience happened. Experience unfolds for all of us. But I've never once been able to find the I or me that's in the midst of that experience. Yet when there is apparent suffering for me, there does seem to be an I or a me that's in their suffering, that, and I think the quicker that comes and goes is the more present I am with that, with being aware that that's an operating mechanism for me that just creates, 12-step used to say that suffering is optional. Well, it's not optional for me if I'm still identified with my own thoughts all the time. And it's not that thought doesn't have its place. It certainly does. But when I identify it and make a self out of it, then the suffering seems to be even worse. And then when you were talking about the space, and then the open the eyes, and it just, I was kind of just following along. I didn't close my eyes, but I just kind of following along, and attention, when you were talking, attention just relaxed. And so there was really nothing but just kind of color. There wasn't any identification with like tree or car or house or anything that I was looking at. There was just this openness of whatever was in that view. And then as attention started to contract a little bit, I could see leaves and car and gravel and whatever else. So it seems like attention was what was looking through my eyes. And the more focused it became, the more it contracted into something. It's like trying to see something like in 2 feet of water at the ocean. You see a little glimmer. I really have to focus in on it for a minute in order to reach down and pick it up and see if it's a shell, or in my case, I'm always hoping it's shipwrecked treasure, that I just found the coin.
Gold.
Whenever I go down there, I always think, I'm going to find me a coin, that shipwrecked treasure. Just one coin's all I want. So, but it's, the appreciation of this format is that for each of us, something, different. And as each person talks on that, it seems to expand and what I'm able to see and not able to see. And there's just an appreciation for that.
Yeah.
Brought up quite a lot for me. I was listening to this guy, Stephen Jenkinson, who's a Canadian writer, thinker, speaker. And he used to work in what he called the death trade. He used to work in, what do you call them? The homes when people are going to die, and they're not care homes, but there's another word for them here. I can't remember what they are. Anyway, so he would help people pass on, essentially. And one of the things he was talking about the other day that I was listening to was, he was saying we're at a time when there are more elderly people on the planet than ever before in human history. And as such, we're reaching all of these different kinds of endings, and they are experienced as these interruptions in our daily routines, offenses, and another word that he used, I can't remember, but essentially endings. And and he said, what sort of obligations does this leave us with? Or he asked that, and then he answered it in terms of something to the effect of, essentially, we've got to realize that all of these limits that we have, the limit of death, essentially, is there to give us the opportunity to practice being human. And I really loved that kind of sentence. And then in relation to what you guys were just talking about, there was this, I want to be quite clear about the language here. There was this sense of like, we're on the receiving end of life. Like we've kind of been conditioned for many, many centuries to be what you just described, Luke, and you, Rob, to be that kind of directive. So essentially like the seeing, no, the looking. When I'm looking at something directly, it's like my experience of this, as you were going through it, Rob, Luke, was a narrowing of vision. And there's some kind of effort involved in that. It requires an energy that kind of goes outward that way and narrows down my sense of vision. And then when you described the seeing, like, and I watched you sort of, you had your eyes closed, you were deep in that kind of contemplation or the curiosity, the inquiry itself. And then when you opened your eyes, you started describing it, and the word receptive came to me. Like, we're just receiving, seeing. Like, it's something that we don't have to go out to get. It's just something that sort of comes in.
Mm.
That's what this guy Stephen was really referring to when he talked about we're on the receiving end of life. Like, we don't really make things happen, but we've liked to think that we have. And that's the identity piece, I think. I think we've been conditioned over all of these many generations to believe like there's this separate self, and that separate self makes things happen by being directive and by efforting, by using force in some cases. But in that, we've dismissed the receptivity of us, and therefore we find ourselves in a lot of problems. There's an imbalance. There's a lack of equilibrium in what a lot of people talk about in terms of feminine and masculine energies in the world. And then that brought up two archetypes, like two archetypal images of the feminine and masculine. And one was the cup or the vessel, which receives, right? And it receives everything. Everything kind of fits into it, and it just molds into the shape of the vessel. It's big enough, right? Which was kind of the idea of the seeing that you described. Like, it just receives all of the color and light around us and the form. And then the sword would be the other one. Like, the sword kind of gets tempered. The metal gets tempered and hammered and molded and heated up and put in under lots of pressure, and to create this kind of long, thin, narrow piece of equipment that is pointed.
Attention, focus.
Yeah. And so that seems to be just two different ways of the use of that attention, the use of that awareness. And it made me kind of think about in a more kind of poetic way of viewing it would be sort of Shakespeare. He talks about like all the world's a stage, and all of us are these players in a play, these actors in a play. And we don't necessarily get to choose the role that we play, but we can have some influence over the script, like how we present the words that we choose to use in any moment in that play, for example. And I just like that idea of rebalancing that kind of that sort of sword and the vest and the cup. Like, there is an aspect of us that is very receptive, and in that, then that's when I think you used these words, Rob, like the attention relaxes. So I don't have to do all of this shit that I've been conditioned to do. My attention can just rest, and then I feel more able to just like be on the receiving end of life. Right at this moment, I can smell and feel a really, really faint breeze coming through the open doors just to my right. And there's a smell on the air, and there's a sense of the light of the sun, and just kind of gently coming in through my closed eyelids over there. And I feel much more present. I feel much more out of time, and really into that eternal present moment. And there's nothing I'm bothered by. There's nothing I'm looking for or wanting. And then I can also notice, as I say that, like the mind sort of has this pull, tries to grab my attention and say, you should be the sword right now. You should be directive, and you should want this and that and that and that, and you need to make it happen. And to make it happen, you need to plan. And I just get pulled into all of the time again. Like, to plan, I have to split up my time over the next sort of couple of weeks into little sections, and each one has to have a goal, and it's sort of like it gets all businesslike and official, and it feels like a lot of effort right now. A lot of efforting goes into that, but the receptivity part, I feel much more. I don't know, much more easy to just relax into that. Whereas some people seem very oriented into that scheduled way of being in life, and the directive way. Like they have specific goals, specific ambitions, specific achievements that they want to get done within the time that they have in this world. And yeah.
Oh man, I got such a nice swelling of gratitude that came when you talked about what that man said, and then you sort of just put it in a little bit of a different way that I understood it better. Like the receptivity of that we don't have to do anything and we can see. And it just came as such a big, strong welling of gratitude that it's such a blessing or a nice thing that we can do that without needing to be deserving or be any particular way. And then I love the symbols you were using, because it came to me, yes, it's exactly that, the attention, the masculine that needs to penetrate, and then the feminine. And then it came to me that there's, it's not necessarily the difference, but the resting can be without the sword. It can have those moments without the sword, and that's the difference, because it's like one relies on the other to a degree, and when that's seen, then the sword, the quality of the sword is different because the intent is different. And then it came right at the end that it's not necessarily a sword that comes out like this. Maybe it's like a wave, a pointed wave that rises out of the space of nothingness and has its time and then falls back in. And there's a different quality of like, I'm just the sword. I need to do an effort. I'm going to die. And then, like the panic and the fucking terror of like going back in. But if you know the space that's always here, that everything comes out of, then the quality of this is so deep for me. It changes the entire reason, or like intent. It changes the entire reason and intent for the sword, because then then if the survival part of it, I don't know how to explain it.
Well, I do want to say that I just loved your, you just went straight into Shakespearean acting then. Like it's like you were on stage, like, I'm going to die, and this kind of zooming into it's just perfect.
Well, it's like, if you know that that's not the only thing that you are, then you can enjoy the ride so much more. You can fully, because I think I've been a bit like about the space, I think because, and it's a balance thing, you assume yourself to be the sword for so long, and there's so much effort, and it's suffering. If all you are is the sword, then the sword's going to die, so it's such a stress to just be that. But then to realize the space, then to realize the source of the sword, and like the whole entire reason for the glory of the sword is the space that it's in, that it comes out of and goes back into. So to realize that, I think I've been a bit too swinging the other way with the sword, with the space, and just what you said. I mean, I know it, but it's like it needs to be keep repeating, keep experiencing that the intent of this is not about fear. It's like going through the sky in the blaze of glory, being completely, and not even having to be egotistical or anything like that. It's like the joy of just being alive, of feeling that sun on the face is all part of it. It's not tied into being the like greatest person in the world with the biggest dick in the world, or anything like that. It's not an idea, although it kind of is, but it's the intent and the purpose and the quality then of it all changes for me. And it might like the fear in that, maybe it still comes back. Of course it still comes back. But
and Rob, you described that really beautifully too. When you sort of said, like, when you get kind of trapped in that in a particular fear, and you might call up one of your friends and they just give those little gentle reminders that you already know, but you get so, or I find with me, I get so kind of locked into a pattern of thinking that's usually very self-deprecating, and it's hard to sort of pull myself out of it. And I just need someone else. I just need to be receptive enough to the help from someone else, or the little bit of guidance, as a reminder to, like, hey, do you remember this? Do you remember this kind of tool of inquiry and that curiosity? And then suddenly something sort of shifts almost effortlessly. I don't really have to use the sword anymore. I'm just receiving that gift of memory, of a reminder from a friend. And it's like something just kind of lifts. It gets much lighter. And then I think the memory itself is just like, oh yeah, I'm not that. That's just a sensation I'm feeling, or a thought that's just whirring around in my head, that still wants to be noticed, that still wants attention, that still wants to become that identity that you both mentioned. And it loves the suffering. It eats up that suffering for dinner. So if I feed it that, like, it gets satisfied for a while. If I don't feed it, it kind of has a tantrum for a bit, and then just seems to sort of to die off, to quieten down. And that's kind of when I can feel more of that receptivity. And the gratitude you said you felt, Luke, was like a perfect example of that receptivity. You didn't need to kind of go out to get it. You were just receptive to it. So it feels like when we are that, then we can receive all of the gifts of life, as well as the things that feel a little bit more like suffering, which
I think you're describing the conditioned operating system really, really well, and the identification with that operating system, often unconscious for a long time for me. And it would just run, and I would identify with it and call it who I was. And it had a real momentum and a real power, and it started since childhood, and it really brings, recognitions that that's what happened to my parents and their parents, and as far back as you can go, and then how much it played a role, and then you start to break free from it. But it still has so much momentum that if I'm in a situation in at work or in life or something like that, it will just kick back in again. I'll jump right on that roller coaster, and I'll ride it for a while, and then I'll get in touch with somebody like one of you guys, or and you'll go, hey Rob, what I hear you saying is, and all of a sudden the roller coaster stops. You get some awareness about the fact that you're in the conditioned operating system again. But you had said something earlier that just opened as you were talking and Luke was talking. There was just this opening where different things were popping in on their own, and I forgot what it was. It's funny how that happens. It had to do with just completely left. Maybe I'm not supposed to talk about that. So, but whatever it was just, there was just this big, huge opening of recognition again And I think that for me is where insights come from, is that I'll be sitting and listening, and then an opening will happen and the insights will start coming through and I can see them, and how it relates to what you're saying and the versions of it for me that seem to be um, really powerful and helpful. Um, and then there's, you know, it's interesting because there's the wanting to share that um, with you guys, and then but really seeing so clearly how you were talking about the operating system, the conditioned operating system. So talking about that and then wanting to swing back to it, and it's closed now. And I'm sure it'll open back up and it'll come back to me later because it always does. But in this moment, it just kind of
You
the
can give us
door
a
just
call
kind
back, okay?
of
I'll
slams
keep it
shut.
open and just run back in
Yeah.
when it comes.
But I'd invite you to just kind of keep following. I was like fully with you in that you were just kind of narrating the story of what was happening right now, and I had the same thing just 5 minutes before. I was quoting Stephen Jenkinson, and the piece that I actually wanted to quote, the piece about we're on the receiving end of life, had completely disappeared, and there was a little bit of a struggle for words because I didn't want the a kind of awkward gap of silence or whatever. And anyway, you just kind of pretty much described exactly what I'd been experiencing just earlier. So I'd be happy to just keep on listening to like what's going on
Well,
in you now.
and then the moment that all of that was happening, I could feel, I kind of came back and looked at myself in the screen. I could see the face was getting a little red. There was almost like an embarrassment or a wanting that was kind of, behind it all, of wanting to be able to share something and it not be available to me. And so there was just like, maybe, I don't know if it was embarrassment. It could have been embarrassment, but there was definitely a change in the um, heat came up. I could feel that. So that's the end the moment inquiry. It's like if I wanted to sit with that, um, what popped was, oh, my memory's not as good as it used to be. I'm getting older. Just turned 65 a couple days ago. So that all of those things kind of came as a spontaneous reaction to not being able to remember something. And I get that a lot more these days. I'll be in conversations and really wanting to share something, and the ability to grasp the words and just doesn't seem to be there. And then another, 30, 40 minutes later, I'm not in that situation, and it all comes pouring back through. And I'm like, oh, this is what it was that I wanted to say. So, which is just part of the human experience that you were talking about. So,
yeah. And you also described the eye, how that kind of suddenly came in. And so what were the different qualities of that identity? Because I heard the was it embarrassment, or I can't remember what word you used, but there was that kind of rising of the reddening of the face as you looked at yourself in the screen, and I could fully identify with that. There was just this sense of, yeah, I'm so afraid. I am so afraid of public humiliation. And that humiliation would come if I'm sort of building myself up to say something that maybe people want to hear and might be kind of profound or something. And then it's just gone from my head. And there's this.
Or it's a piece of crap.
And right there in that moment was the contraction and the freeze. So you actually going back and talking about it helped me to see much more clearly what had actually, I went into freeze, right? Because what I wanted to be able to do wasn't there. And then there was the quick contraction and the freeze, like, oh, it's not available to me, and then because of that, the redness, the body temperature changed and got warm. And so there was, in some ways, kind of, and I've noticed this to be part of that, is there's kind of a fumbling around with words to try to just work your way through that freeze. It's not really what I want to be saying, but it's almost like a reaction to the fact that freeze is here.
Yeah.
So it's
You
like
want to
another
put something in
mechanism.
its place.
Yeah,
You want to
it's
put
like
something in
part
a
of that
place there, like,
mechanism.
hey, watch this over here.
Yep, that mechanism that then plays itself out.
And do you see the reddening, the heat rising as like also putting something in its place, like to counteract the freeze?
That's interesting.
I can't say that I do, but I can say that I did not want the heat to rise. So the heat was immediately met with, and then I looked at how I would look on screen. So the heat was met with a dissatisfaction. It's like it's almost like trying to hold it back or make it go away somehow quickly. You know what I mean? And therefore you're grasping at words and trying to talk your way through instead of actually embracing the freeze itself, which is interesting. So this has become a pretty helpful form of inquiry. Instead of embracing that moment and saying, "Hey, I just need a minute. I'm in freeze right now." I don't even think I knew I was in freeze at that moment. It's like I've been in freeze before, and I never know until I'm in it for a little bit, you know. In that particular moment, it's like the only thing I'm really experiencing is shutdown, and then the reaction to shutdown, and that's not wanting to be shut down. You know, wanting that free flow of openness that I was experiencing while you guys were talking, and the insights that were popping, and the enjoyment of that all unfolding in the moment, and wanting to share and be part of that. And then it's like all of a sudden that's just taken away. And it's like, oh, shut down, freeze, red, like, no, this is not what's supposed to be happening right now, you know, type of reaction. So, and then I can actually feel the system as I'm talking about it. The heat seems to have gone away. Um, there's more of a relaxation, but I can still feel that wanting in the background to be able to grasp the insights that had come through. So that's still all part of the experience that's here too. And that's probably part of that I. There's like that I wanted to share that. And so there's what would create the suffering is like I didn't get a chance to um,
Benefit.
share what it was that was coming through. You know, the open channel definitely seemed like it was shut down.
And I'm totally into this because, like, you're demonstrating exactly what you said you most desired, which was that to have that kind of flow of conversation to share with us guys, and everything you've just spoken. I was just like, I'm totally on the boat. I'm totally in the boat with you on that ride, and I have a question that I'm really curious about, which is still the heat, and what do you associate with that heat? So you mentioned the freeze and then the not wanting to freeze, and then this heat arises and not wanting the heat either. Like, is there something that you associate with heat?
Embarrassment, change in color in the face, the way I look. I would have to say the way I look, the way I would be perceived. It's like, so what's popping now? It's like if you could see me, and this is not actually particular to this situation, but I'm kind of shifting back. There's things that are coming from other experiences that I've had. It's like in the moment that you get red and you're in that place of reaction, it's kind of like they know they got you, right? They can see the physiological change happening to you or to me. And I'm trying not to be gotten. So I'm trying to hold it back in a way that I can still and also there's the knowing, because of how many times I've experienced the freeze, that when that shutdown and everything happens, what's available to me in that moment intellectually, as far as communication goes, is extremely limited. I'm not able to grasp onto things that I really want to. I'm more in a state of defensiveness and uncomfortableness. Um, trying to explore the heat. I can still find little remnants of it in the cheek areas and down around the neck.
I'm sure that there's some sort of scientific reason as well. Like that keeps coming up a little bit for me too, but it's such an interesting, question. It's such an interesting question of, well, what's the purpose of it in the moment? I'm positive that there's some sort of scientific, physiological explanation for it. The same with the reason that we shake is to get rid of,
It's a chemical reaction in the body, but what that chemical reaction is about, chemical reaction that comes up in the face.
I'm only saying that too, just because that's what's coming up into my mind. I'm more interested actually in what your experience of it is, I guess. And also, I'm in the same boat too, mate. I definitely understand this, exactly what you're saying. Exactly.
I've never really been able to explore the freeze in the way that I've explored it today, because you can't. It's not something that I can just bring up. It's not something like if we're deciding to do an inquiry and we're just going to let's do freeze. You can't just trigger freeze. I have never, and I've tried it with 4 or 5 different facilitators before, and never once did the freeze state ever come up. So it always seems to be in what I would term an inopportune moment. Like I have this agenda. I have this agenda or this idea of wanting to share or be a certain way, and freeze comes in and says, "No, this is going to be here right now." It's so spontaneous.
And even then, I can't talk about it in the moment. You described it really beautifully because I assume that no blood is getting to my brain, or lack of blood is getting to my brain to fire certain neurons because it's frozen. And so I can't speak what I actually want to speak. I can't be in the moment with a freeze because it's sort of frozen in time. And I think the time it's frozen in is way back in my past. And so I get stuck in those places. And the reason why I asked if the heat rising was a way of counterbalancing that freeze was because I associated heat with anger, with the sort of the fire of no, fuck you. Like I don't, because something in me when I'm in those frozen places, it wants to get out really forcefully out of that place you described, Rob, of the you've got me. Like I'm fully humiliated with your words or with whatever this other person is saying. So you've got me, and like I don't want to be in that situation because there's so much discomfort. I feel so small. I feel so contracted. I feel so powerless. I think that's one of the biggest things for me. I'm powerless, and so the sort of the piece about the heat feels for me, it never comes on in the moment when I wanted it to. And I can only talk about this, like it hasn't happened for a while, but I'm talking about this from in hindsight with a lot of space. Like it's been a year since I've been in this sort of situation, and it took a long time, like maybe an hour or something, to sort of come out of the freeze. And when I did, there was anger there, and it was all angry thoughts. Like, why the fuck did you first towards me? Like, why the fuck did you, Phil, not do this or say this in that moment? And then it's towards the other person, and I just want revenge. Like, I want to make them feel as small as I felt.
Yeah.
And that too feels horrible to me because then I'm stuck in that mind loop, and I can't. I find it very difficult to sort of pull myself out of it.
Yeah, and yet in this particular instance, it's not directed towards anybody at all. And I'm wondering, just listening to you talk, whether the redness is just a reaction, like if the freeze just happened, like the shutdown, the lockdown on its own, And then there was the not wanting to be frozen, and that's what created the change in skin color and stuff. Like, I wonder if, but you're right. This is probably as close to being in the freeze and being able to even investigate it from curiosity as I think
But
I've ever
mine is
done.
my situation feels different to yours in terms of like I'm associating it with anger, whereas there's also that redness of embarrassment and the feeling of humiliation, which I think is just as valid as well. Like yeah, embarrassment is a big fear for me. I don't like that being in that place.
I guess on the other side. Hey, I was able just to go back into it. I just sort of went back to the memory or whatever, the experience of like, oh, I've been caught, and it came for me as sort of this imposter syndrome, of like trying to put out this idea with this information of being knowledgeable or something, some sort of thing, and then being caught in terms of not being able to fulfill that through the actions, not being able to fulfill that, being seen through, so to speak. And then in the body, it came for me as a sharp contraction of freeze, as you say, like, oh, I'm stuck in the moment. And then it came as a sort of disassociation. So I felt like I went away from the sensation. And then as it sort of coalesced back into, oh, I've been caught, because I was here and then I went away. Maybe the people won't notice, but then it came back into I've been caught. And then with that I've been caught came the release, and then the blood came. Like the initial, this feeling was what was holding the blood, and then it was like a flood because it was being held. And that just came as an insight for me that maybe that's the reason for it, for the physiological reason for it too, of like holding that tightness and then the blood being able to open up again and
yeah. And do you think
it's not pleasant? I mean, it's not pleasant, is it? It's not pleasant, like being caught,
No, but I come back to that sort of Shakespearean quote of like all the world's a stage and we're these actors in it. And when we kind of get caught, well, we catch ourselves, but also especially when it's witnessed by others, with that imposter syndrome, I'm trying to, in my experience, like I am often trying to hold on to some version of me that feels more acceptable in a present moment, especially in front of other people. And it would be a version that has some intellectual capacity and perhaps someone with some physical strength, being in a male body, and just various different characteristics that I sort of think, oh yeah, I can identify with that. That can be me. That's a good thing. But then that life doesn't quite hand me that in a particular moment, and I get caught off guard, and like I lose a memory that I'm just like you described, Rob, and then I feel like a fool, and then I've got that role to play, like, oh, I'm the fool, but I don't accept it. And then that's what causes a freeze. Like that's that sort of, the blood doesn't flow anymore, so it gets dammed up. It gets sort of put behind there's a contraction, obviously, so it stops blood from flowing. And then when I can surrender into it, then you just described it really nicely, Luke. Like it's like suddenly there's like the dam bursting, and then everything just sort of, there's a rush, there's a sort of a flow again, and it's simply the flow of aliveness. And then I can kind of move in and out of all of these different roles, whether they're seen as good or bad, if I can surrender fully to them in the moment. And I'm speaking this because like just yesterday I was facilitating someone, and they demonstrated that perfectly. Like they were in a real downward dark spiral at first, and they thought there was no kind of coming out of this. Like I just want to let go of it all and just become nothing. I just kind of want to die. And then we got into an inquiry, and she was looking at an 8-year-old version of herself that loved jump rope. And I asked her to look at the expression on her face. And as she described it, she was describing the very thing that she was expressing in the tone of her voice. There was just aliveness, there was bubbliness, there was, what other word did she use? There was joy. And then as she moved to the next thing, there was this deep grief in her, like, oh, I lost all of that. Somewhere along the line, someone took that away from me. They said it's not acceptable to carry that bubbliness with me as I grow up. And they really expressed the grief. She was off camera, so she was just like, I was just had the tone of her voice to go with. And it was really there. And then she moved into a quite a strong standing for what she valued in life. And that came through in her voice too. So she just kind of moved into these 4 or 5 different sort of versions of herself, 4 or 5 different identities in the space of half an hour. And it was really beautiful to witness. It was like this aliveness to her being stuck in one particular kind of set of characteristics. And it's not surprising that we fear that. I hate the idea of public humiliation. I hate the idea of sort of being like a sort of scapegoat for someone else's judgment. And like, even as I speak that now, like, there's anger about it. Like, fuck you to all of your rules about like how I'm supposed to show up. And I think some of that anger has helped to melt some of the freeze states within me that are kind of were always there, just over a long period of time, and very subtly, it's like kind of old glaciers melting, and it's allowed things to flow a bit more, and it's allowed my sort of expression of self to morph, to more easily move with that receptivity of life, like with whatever life is handing me in a moment. Not always, but definitely more easily now than ever before.
There's a saying in 12-step that really resonated with me after I got into doing the inquiry work. It's very deep, often quite forgotten. Emotional conflict persists below the level of consciousness. At some point, our emotions were given a violent twist, which since had altered our lives for the worse. So that really describes what you were talking about. And what came up for me was all the times, just little memory bubbles that would pop. You don't know what you're talking about. Be quiet. You don't have anything to say. All these attempts to use people that may be more vulnerable and in a state of innocence, just wanting to be part of and chime in, that weren't maybe trying to be the most intellectual person in the room, but participate in conversations and have fun and interact with people, all of a sudden becoming the opportunity to be stepped on and make somebody else feel superior to that person by whatever, opportunity they had. And of course, today I know that often comes from a place of pain that's within them, that they need to feel superior because of their own deep inferiority, which is, to say again about this work, it's through doing this over the years with you guys and others that the understandings started to come in place in alignment with what it was I was actually starting to experience, which never has completely relieved me of anything, but has certainly helped my nervous system relax, because it does give you a way to kind of put the pieces together of, okay, so this is how my this is how my psychology got to where it was, basically in reaction to the people that I had met and run into over the course of my life. And not everybody. There was people that I had that were really open and loving, but in a large portion, I would say not always, not so much. So
Mm. Mm.
Hey, we're getting a bit close. I wanted to just say that, ma'am, it's beautiful. What comes into my mind is my wife, and I always had this problem with being a fool. Looking like a fool and not being smart enough and not being strong enough. Some manly thing as well. All this crap going on, and the basic problem is the incapacity to maintain some state of, because there were times I was smart, there was times I was manly, but then there was also times when I couldn't be those things, and then I couldn't, as you said, flow between and accept this movement between the things. And for me, my wife, mate, she's just given me the greatest thing by saying to me that, hey, that she's free. She's accepted fully that she can be a fool. She's accepted it fully. And it means that she can be free. She's never, ever going to be afraid of being a fool. And it just allows her such a freedom. And I can't necessarily say that that's me entirely, but again, a nice welling of gratitude. How kind is life to allow me someone in it that can give me that little bit of insight. It's such a strong insight that I can turn to. Maybe not necessarily always in the situation, because I still get the freeze, I still react, I still get angry, but it's something I can always look in afterwards, and it's something I'm getting more capable of accepting within myself.
Yeah.
I don't like it, and she says to me, that's the second piece of advice. She's like, I much prefer chocolate ice cream than vanilla ice cream, and I'm always going to choose chocolate ice cream than vanilla ice cream. But if all there is vanilla ice cream, I'm not going to get upset about it, That's the second beautiful piece of advice to me. So, closing words?
Yeah, just love.
What was
being
that
here.
last piece you said?
Oh, I just said closing words. Do we have any closing words? It's been a pretty good stream. We've got like one, I don't know, it's saying, I just realized as we were going through that it's saying that there's one visitor, one person watching us, but it might just be me on my phone. I'm not sure. We'll never know. But yeah, closing words. I'd love to hear some closing words. I just feel gratitude myself, so.
I interrupted you, Rob. Go ahead. What were you saying?
I was just saying I love being here with you guys, and what keeps coming to mind is the more that I am available to open to feel, whether it's full or foolish, or as I heard one guy say not too long ago, he was in a conversation and he didn't know something, and instead of turning it on himself, he said, I just kind of love my lack of knowledge around football. Or around, and so he didn't just beat himself up. He just kind of let himself off the hook, and and I took note. I'm not sure how many other people did, but immediately I took note of that and said, I adopt a little bit more of that and let myself off the hook a little more.
Yeah. Same sense of gratitude for being here. I really like being in this space with you guys and the container that we have all created. And I'm kind of reminded of, like, I resonate with what you've both been saying about that sort of sense of being made to feel inferior, or being made to recognize the belief of inferiority that's sort of been instilled in us somewhere. And I it used to be so strong in me, but my interest in it has sort of dropped away. Like I noticed the sort of the rise and fall of feeling inferior and then wanting to be superior, and how that kind of relates to bully and victim, or perpetrator and victim, and this sort of thing. And somewhere along the line, I sort of lost interest. And it brings up a quote for me. I don't remember who who said this, but it just stayed with me, and it was simply the power of a stone in its right place. The power of a stone in its right place. Like we look around at the world, we see pebbles, stones, rocks everywhere, and they're kind of viewed as a dime a dozen. But you put a rock in its right place, like, and it holds the banks of a river in place. It allows water to flow. It can be really valuable, and it's really the same with people. Like you put them in the right place at the right sort of time, then they're crucial to their surroundings. They're crucial to their community, and so this idea of like needing to be something and needing to keep it stable, like to always be that thing, that feels like psychosis to me. It's not real. It's not true. And I am much more willing to kind of allow my sort of sense of self to be mutable, to be constantly changing, and to be gifted, to feel like I'm being gifted with something at any particular time. And if that gift means like the vulnerability, then in a particular space or amongst particular people, then it can be really uncomfortable, but also it can be really important for those other people to just experience what it is for someone to be in a vulnerable place, because I think that's what's really lacking in our kind of northern culture at the moment. Like the people of the wealthy north, like nobody wants to be vulnerable. Everybody kind of wants to be superhuman in these times, and superhuman means like I'm pretty much numb. I don't feel anything. I don't kind of get any vulnerability. But I notice my insides sort of tell me, like, when somebody is vulnerable, I really, really trust them. Like my whole body kind of opens to who they are. Whereas when they don't show that vulnerability, when they try to sort of lord it over me and be superior, something in me closes off, and it's not my brain that's directing that. There's something kind of deeper in the cells of my body, and that does that. Yeah, my closing words. Thanks, guys.
Just one last thing, and that is I remembered everything I was going to say earlier.
Hit it. Go.
Say it.
Hit it.
No need to share, but just as Phil was speaking, it all came flooding back in, so I just thought that was funny.
Well, I really want to hear it, Rob.
Yeah, me too.
No,
me too.
I'm good. There's no
I'm not
reason.
going anywhere.
I just it related to some people had to have an outcome in life and really work hard for that, and some people just seem to be more open to move and flow with life, and the stresses that come along with that, trying to get somewhere. And it seems like there's a lot more ease and just kind of and this is kind of what I've noticed in my own life, that there is so many things that does come to me if I'm available and open-minded. Maybe it comes in a different way. Maybe I'll never be Elon Musk, but I'll still be have a lot more enjoyment and movement and sense of moving in life the way that I'm supposed to. It seems to speak to me in that type of way. And it may be speaking to the other people in that type of way too, that have a lot of focus and wanting to get an outcome. And, I just wonder how much of that's conditioning, how much of it is what a child is actually born with, because we know different children have different capabilities at different ages and what comes through them. And we don't really know how that is, right? That 6-year-olds and 12-year-olds, whatever, have, the different things in them that then come into the world. And I think there's a real beauty in all of that and the way it all presents itself, unless I look at it as a form of comparison and say, oh, he had this and I didn't. It's like the athlete, it can be, and I'm not able to. It's like, if I'd have just been born 6'5", blah, blah, blah. So, but as you were talking, all of those insights, that opening came again, and these things started, and there's a sense of really enjoying how all of that speaks to me, how it comes through, and the realization that seems to be true for me. And that is, that yes, there's going to be some effort that's going to have to be put in, but just look to see what's opening itself, and then move towards that and see where you go, and realize that I mean, I'm 65 now. I've got a lot I can look back on, and my whole life seems to have been unfolding in front of me. You know, it's when I made those decisions of self where I really put a lot of stress on myself that I had to do this and had to do that, that life didn't seem all that fun.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
I've got the feeling my wife's home, so I just want to put the light on for her. Hey, I'm glad that we took the time and that came in at the end for you. I'm reminded of something else too, actually. Have you guys seen The Mighty Ducks, the movie?
The Mighty
No,
Ducks.
Rob?
Oh, wait, maybe I.
Mighty Ducks. Emilio Estevez, he's like this. He was this like hot shit hockey player, but then something happened and he missed the
Oh, I
shot,
might have
right?
seen it. Like, that's an old movie, isn't it?
It's a really old movie. It's got one beautiful line in it. It's one just smashed me. I remember it just came in now. It absolutely smashed me when I saw it. I was just a gasp. And he's talking to this kid, and he's telling the kids like, the kids. He's becomes the coach of this little peewee side, right? And he's talking to this kid, and he's telling this kid the same story he's been like, he's been like holding on to because he missed this shot, and he's telling the kid about, if only this thing had been 2 inches to the left or 1 inch to the left, it would have gone in the thing and I would have been the king shit, and the kid's like, yeah, but if it missed, 2 inches to the right, it would have missed the goal altogether, because of the thing hit the post. And he's just stuck there. He's like, with this look on his face, like, fuck, I never thought about that at all. But you just reminded me of that.
I love how things just pop for us. Just these through conversation, openings happen, and stuff just kind of comes through that opening. I love that. That speaks to me more than anything else.
Such a good like insight for me. Okay, hey, hold on just 1 second. Say goodbye to the one person that might be watching us. Bye.